when a place comes together with a story that can only happen in this place, when I can make place and story cross and then have a character that belongs into that place, then I feel I have a movie.
Where do we go to find ourselves? That question is at the center of most of Wim Wenders' films. In Perfect Days, Wenders portrays the minutiae of the day-to-day in the life of Hirayama, a Japanese man charged to clean some of Tokyo's most elaborately designed public restrooms. The film is circumscribed to a small area of the city, yet travel remains at its center. On his car during the days and on his bike on the weekends, Hirayama is in constant motion. Yet in a sense, his movement is just as aimless as the desperate protagonists of Wim Wenders' early films. Between 1974 and 1976, Wenders directed a loosely intertwined set of films that eventually became known as the road movie trilogy. Alice in the Cities starts with Rudiger Vogler on a North Carolina beach. He was tasked to write about the real America of the road, yet he fails because he insists on making images instead of writing.
Hey man, what you taking pictures for?
Yet Vogler is constantly discontent because, just like words, the photographic image doesn't capture the world he sees. He travels back to his native Germany as he becomes the involuntary caretaker of a young girl named Alice. There he looks for her grandmother across several cities.
Gelsenkirchen, Göttingen, Hamburg, Hannover, Heidelberg.
You got me walking.
In the wrong move, Vogler leaves his hometown of Glückstadt and sets out for Bonn, crosses paths with a ragtag group, and they travel together to a castle overlooking the Rhine. He eventually finds himself alone in the south of Germany, the summit of the Zugspitze. The last film of the trilogy, Kings of the Road, takes place across the western side of the East German border. Vogler again, now playing a projection equipment repair mechanic, meets a suicidal man and lets him tag along in his repair truck. All these films have travel in common, yet unlike most road movies, the characters never arrive at their destination. In films like Into the Wild or Thelma and Louise, the protagonists reach the end of the road. The films of Wim Wenders end when a new road begins.
Staring at the ceiling.
For The New Yorker, Richard Brody wrote that the crossing of borders, the disorientation of travel, the melding of cultures, the attention shifting of modern communication that puts the focus on places far from the bodies at hand, these have been Wenders' themes for the past 40 years. And it all started because of a practical concern. Wenders wanted to build a story as he was shooting it, letting the film unfold, one event stringing along the next. But for that to happen, the shoot needs to be linear, chronological. That's true for most movies except for road movies.
Which was initially my reason to do road movies, because no production company and no production manager, even if I was the producer myself, they never understood why I would want to shoot a movie in chronological order, because most movies you shoot the ending and the beginning, and then you shoot locations and you shoot it off, and then doing road movies was a perfect excuse to shooting total chronological order. I mean, the road defines the story.
One could try to psychoanalyze Wenders all day, point the finger at his upbringing in post-World War II Germany, how he grew up in a country divided in two. Regardless of his ultimately inscrutable personal motivations, it is clear that travel became a way for Wenders to bridge a gap between himself and the world. Yet with travel, it's inevitable that feelings of rootlessness and homesickness will arise. The entire world becomes home, but in a sense, home disappears. And so Vogler looks for home, and all the people he meets along the way look for the same. And of course, Wim Wenders too, the director of The Road, who has filmed all over the world, in his home country of Germany, in Portugal, in Italy, all over America, and of course Japan. Wenders perpetually looks for home, but never finds it. 40 years before Perfect Days, Wim Wenders traveled to Japan to make a documentary about the late master Yasujiro Ozu. But even in the early 80s, Wenders found that the city was a torrent of impersonal, unkind, and threatening images. The world of Ozu had disappeared.
Perhaps that was what no longer existed. The images of the loving and ordered world of the mythical city of Tokyo that I knew from the films of Yasujiro Ozu. A view which still could achieve order in a world out of order.
Hirayama is at odds with current-day Tokyo. He keeps the modernity of the world at bay, resorting to analog technology, old music, and a repetition of living reminiscent of Ozu's protagonists. Despite living in the same house for a long time, like most of Wenders' protagonists, even if he stands still, Hirayama too is homesick. He's homesick for a foreign land.
Just like I'll be. But someday you'll be back, and together we can pack and leave with no loneliness. This is the first time that you're leaving.